So the third thing I wanted to touch upon, obviously it's a favorite subject of the industry. When people talk about blockchain, what it is, and how do we go about doing it. So I would briefly want to touch upon blockchain. Why? Because supply chain finance is one of the bigger use cases for the blockchain industry, and which is where this becomes important that we know what blockchain is. So blockchain is a growing list of records called blocks which are linked using cryptography. So don't worry about the technical jargon. I'll explain you in a very simple language. So what it essentially means that you have a ledger which is distributed across, let's say 20,000 nodes, and all the ledgers have a copy of the transactions that are happening on ground. So let's say I'll pick up a case of Bitcoin, for example. So let's say today A transfers 0.5 Bitcoin to B, and this transaction is captured in the ledger, and a copy of this ledger is there across all 20,000 nodes. So A, it becomes a permanent thing. So nobody can change that, because that list is being maintained by 20,000 nodes across the globe, spread across multiple countries, continents, and everybody is running the same copy of it. So the blockchain basically means it is a chain of blocks, which is where every block has some information stored in it. Let us not go into the technicalities of it as to what exactly is that information, what is a hash, and what are the cryptographic things. But simplistically speaking, it is a chain of blocks which basically stores some information, and there are some thousands of copies spread across the globe, so that for anybody to be able to change it, it is not possible. Okay. Each block contains a cryptographic hash. So one of the things important in the second line is that every data is connected to the previous block, and it has a timestamp. So timestamp is very, very important if you look at it from a blockchain perspective or from a supply chain perspective. Why? Because it helps you to establish the provenance of any asset. So what provenance basically means is who owned the asset before this, and who owned the asset before the previous owner. So you will be able to get a chain of it, and which is where one of the biggest use cases of blockchain has been around the asset ownership. So when you talk about asset ownership, it can be your land, it can be your invoice, it can be your art, it can be anything to do with, it can be your gold for that matter. So any asset can be, blockchain can be used to store the history or provenance of any of the assets, and that is where I think the timestamp part comes very handy. And there's a very interesting story. There was this one case in US where one of the writers, he actually published a text or a content, and he took a hash of it and stored it in a blockchain. 1 year down the line, somebody else claimed that they have come up with the same content and they own that content. And this guy actually took out the hash, was able to retrieve the hash from the blockchain, and was able to prove it in the court of law that this was something that he had created. Because simplistically speaking, when you look at a hash of any text or any string, that changes even if you change a simple space in it. So if it is corresponding to the same hash, which means that that content was available 1 year back. And incidentally, he won the case. So there are a lot of interesting examples that are coming up in the industry where people are applying blockchain to it. So as we said, it is an open distributed ledger that can record transactions between two parties efficiently and in a verifiable and permanent way. Verifiable because when you look at the cryptography part of it, you're using private and public key to be able to authenticate your transaction, but I'll not go into the details of it. Why blockchain? Because it is decentralized. What do you mean by decentralized? It basically means is that no single computer hosts everything. It is spread across a lot of nodes, lot of computers, and there is almost zero possibility of a downtime. So I don't know if you know, but blockchains like Ethereum and all, they have never had any downtime. So when I say never, I literally mean it. I mean, there hasn't been even a single second where the blockchain was down. So that is the kind of trust you can have on this. Politically decentralized because no one party controls everything. So which is where the politically decentralized thing comes into picture. Architecturally decentralized because you have a lot of nodes sharing the entire load of computing, storage, and everything. But logically centralized. So it acts as a single world computer, which is spread across the entire world, and everybody is using it. Immutability because nobody can practically change any data on the blockchain. Now that should ring some bells, because when you talk about immutability, a lot of these financial transactions, all the kind of work where large amount of funds or money is involved, that is where these things start picking up, because that is where you need that kind of a confidence. I'll come to that when I talk about supply chain. Provenance, I talk about how to be able to establish the ownership of a particular asset can be established through a blockchain. And security, obviously one of the biggest thing is around the security bit. Blockchain in the supply chain paradigm. So why I picked up the blockchain example is because blockchain as a technology is very, very applicable in the supply chain side. And how does that happen is, you think of a system or a infrastructure where you have all the stakeholders that are involved in a supply chain transaction. Whether it is your vendor, whether it is your corporate, whether it is your financial institution. Think of a situation where all these parties are a part of this system. They are there as a authorized stakeholder, and they are running the entire thing. So every time, I'll run through the example. So every time a vendor raises an invoice, that information goes onto a blockchain. Whenever the corporate approves it, they do it through their private key, and that information again sits on the blockchain. Now, as an independent block or a blockchain, that has everything which a financial institution needs to be able to go ahead and do the funding. So the way it is different from your normal APIs from the banks is that they still need to check back with the corporate or with the financial institution that everything is in place and we are going ahead. But in case of a blockchain, the moment a vendor raises the invoice and submits all the information that is required related to it, and the corporate approves it, it becomes a self-sustaining blockchain, which a financial institution can look at it and fund independently. So they will not come back to the corporate, they will not come back to anybody else to verify that information. And that becomes an infrastructure where it can be opened up to multiple financial institutions, where they're not worried about any kind of fake invoices, any kind of exaggeration in the amount, or any other fraud-related stuff. So proof of authority is basically, here you're talking about a consensus between the stakeholders. That is the consensus algorithm that most of these permissioned blockchains that are using. So I'll look at, if you look at the private applications that are there, or the private solutions that the corporates have come up with, they use this particular algorithm. And then there's no need for APIs. It is a self-sustaining infrastructure where you have all these blockchains available in the system, and any financial institutions can actually go and pick it up, and they can go ahead and do the funding. So a lot of companies are picking this up. It might not be relevant immediately from your perspective, but this is one of the areas which is creating a lot of disruption outside India. So, as a CFO or a financial controller or a head of finance of your organization, I wanted to basically touch upon the different models around supply chain financing that are creating waves in the market.